So, for months, Donald Trump was fighting the release of documents tied to Jeffrey Epstein. But now, his message has totally flipped. He's urging the country to just move on. So what's really going on here? Today, we're going to break down his recent statements, which are, often pretty contradictory, to really try and understand the strategy at play.
Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at that move on plea. Then, we're going to try to decode his claim that he's actually the victim of a conspiracy. After that, we'll get into his changing story on the Clintons, which is interesting. We'll introduce this idea of political utility, and finally, we'll see how this whole thing connects to his base and the upcoming midterms.
All right, first up, let's dig into the statement that really kicked off this whole news cycle. It sounds pretty simple on the surface, but as you're about to see, the context here is absolutely everything.
So there it is. That's Trump's public call to action. But you've got to remember, this comes right after he spent months fighting to block these exact files from ever seeing the light of day. So you have to ask yourself, why the sudden change of heart? Why is now the time to move on?
And here's the key part of his public stance. He isn't just saying, okay, the documents are out. No, he's framing this as a complete victory lap, basically saying they prove he's totally in the clear. But his story doesn't even stop there.
Right, so this brings us to his next claim. It's not just about being innocent, it's about him being a victim. So let's see how that idea holds up when we look at what the analysis says. This is such a fascinating pivot. He's not just saying I wasn't involved. He's actually claiming he was the target of a conspiracy by Epstein. He's trying to flip the script and position himself as one of the victims in this whole narrative.
But what's really interesting is how that claim of being a victim seems to clash with the evidence presented in the analysis. A former Republican media consultant, Matthew Sheffield, points to evidence that suggests something else entirely. Instead of a conspiracy against Trump, emails apparently show coordination with people like Epstein and billionaire Peter Thiel on what he should say. Sheffield also notes that the administration tried to basically scrub Trump's name from these files. But the document dump was just so massive they couldn't get everything. And that means there are still allegations, some of them from FBI testimony, right there in the public record.
And this is where we get to what might be the most jarring contradiction of all. I'm talking about Trump's complete 180 on Bill and Hillary Clinton's role in the whole Epstein affair.
This is really the question that helps unlock the whole strategy. For years, the link between Epstein and the Clintons was a massive talking point for Trump and his supporters. But now, well, that's all changed.
Just look at the difference here. On one side, in the before column, he's calling this a Democrat problem, vowing to investigate them. Now you look at the now column, and he's calling the whole thing a shame. He's basically saying they're being treated unfairly, which sounds an awful lot like how he claims he's being treated.
So what on earth is going on? How do you make sense of all these U-turns? Well, the expert analysis gives us a really powerful way to think about this, and honestly, about Trump's communication style in general.
And that brings us to this core idea: political utility. The thinking here is that for a political figure like Trump, whether a statement is factually true or consistent, that's not really the point. What matters most is its usefulness. Is this statement helpful to me, right here, right now?
And according to Sheffield, this isn't him being confused or forgetful. No, it's a very deliberate tactic. The story changes because his interests have changed. A while back, attacking the Clintons was useful. Today, it's more useful for him to paint himself as a fellow victim of some kind of unfair system.
Okay, so why does any of this actually matter right now? Well, this isn't just some abstract communications theory. It has very real-world consequences, especially with midterm elections just around the corner. And, this strategy isn't without its risks. His initial fight to keep the files secret and what's in them has cost him some big-name supporters. People like podcaster Joe Rogan, for example, have come out and said they just can't back him anymore because of this. Which makes you wonder, right? If you're losing people like Joe Rogan, why would you double down on this strategy? Well, the answer seems to be all about how information gets filtered down to his most loyal supporters. Because according to the source material, the simple reality is that many people in his base just haven't heard the full story. It's alleged that major right-wing media outlets effectively censor these stories, protecting their audience from the more damaging details. And this media environment is so important. It creates the perfect conditions for that political utility strategy to really work.
It basically means he can operate with a completely different set of facts when he's talking to his core audience. He can frame this whole thing as just another unfair attack from some vague, shadowy they, and by defending the Clintons from that same they, he's really just defending himself and building up sympathy with the people who trust him the most.
And that really is the big question this whole thing leaves us with. When facts become flexible and stories are just tools, it kind of puts the pressure back on all of us, doesn't it? To really think critically, not just about what is being said, but why it's being said at this exact moment.